We have a new QB3 to discuss, and it's also time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I am your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate you all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, folks, the Bills added that third quarterback to the mix. We're going to talk about Shane Buechele, the Bills' new practice squad quarterback, QB3. I have a lot to say about him. And then a nice slate of herd mentality items for us to get into, some really good topics that we're going to discuss. So let's get into it, and let's start with QB3, Shane Buechele. And obviously with Matt Barkley, the elbow injury, he's out for the entire season. The Bills had to find another quarterback. So Josh Allen, your starter, Kyle Allen, QB2 on the roster. Then you have to have a QB3 that you stash on your practice squad. And so for the Bills, that is Shane Buechele, who is 25 years old, was an undrafted free agent in 2021. He signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, and he spent the last 2 years on their practice squad and then was with them throughout this offseason and preseason. And then he cleared waivers, and the Bills signed him to their practice squad. He's 6 foot, 210 pounds, an RAS score of 1.83. And RAS is on a scale of 0 to 10. 10 is perfect. 1.83 is not very good. This is not a very physically gifted quarterback in terms of size or athleticism. So 6 foot, 210, and you're not going to be impressed with his movement skills in terms of explosive athleticism. Buechele started his career in college at Texas and was a 4-star recruit, pretty big-time recruit coming out. And he started for the Longhorns for a couple of seasons, his first 2 seasons in college. And then he got beat out by Sam Ehlinger. And that prompted him to transfer to SMU. And he was really productive for 2 seasons as the starting quarterback at SMU. He left college with 42 starts and over 11,000 passing yards, a ton of touchdowns as well. I think like 87 passing touchdowns. And in 3 years of preseason with the Kansas City Chiefs, Buechele was 97 of 151, so a completion percentage of 64.2, 1,106 yards, 9 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and a passer rating of 89.4. I want to give you my pre-draft scouting report summary on Shane Buechele. He was a guy that I studied very closely at SMU, wrote a full scouting report, 3 years ago whenever he was coming out. And so here's the summary of the scouting report. If you want to see the full thing, which offers analysis on like 10 different traits, check out my Twitter account. It's at the Joe Marino. I tweeted that out right after the Bills signed him, so you can check that out and see the full thoughts. But here's the summary. This is what I wrote. After 3 seasons at Texas, Shane Buechele transferred to SMU, where he settled into a starting role for 2018 and 2019. He quickly became a productive passer for the Mustangs, showing wonderful command of the offense and earning captainship in his first year. Buechele is a good rhythm passer with sound accuracy, good touch, and effective movement skills within the pocket. With that said, he lacks size, arm strength, dynamic athleticism, and he has an elongated throwing motion. He isn't much of a threat to win outside of structure, and he does not fare well when he's forced to speed up his process. While Buechele doesn't have the desired physical traits to be viewed as a potential starter, he does have developmental appeal as a backup quarterback in a West Coast offense. He has the baseline ability to keep an offense on schedule if things are right around him. So there's some good there. A guy that rhythm player, can get the ball out, has decent accuracy, but there's just limitations in terms of physical upside. And he's more of a, 3 steps, get the ball out of his hands type player. And for the Bills, maybe this player doesn't sound overly exciting. Well, let's be honest. I mean, he was a UDFA that got beat out at Texas by Sam Ehlinger and has spent a couple of years on a practice squad. There's a reason for those things. But when you're mindful of what Buechele is being asked to do for the Buffalo Bills, I think you can understand the way that he fits into this equation. The primary job for Shane Buechele with the Buffalo Bills as the practice squad QB3 is to run the scout team. I mean, that's what this guy's job is to do. He has to give the defense good looks in practice. He has to simulate being the Bills' opponent's starting quarterback. So next week, he's Aaron Rodgers. The week after that, he's Sam Howell. The week after that, he's Jimmy Garoppolo. Then he's Tua, right? I mean, that's what this guy's got to do. Trevor Lawrence, Daniel Jones. He has to be those people in practice for the scout team offense to give the Bills' starting defense good looks. I mean, that's what he has to do. And so I don't think you should be looking at Shane Buechele as this threat in any way to Kyle Allen as the Bills' QB2. Now, if he does well in 2023 on the Bills practice squad running the scout team, then he could have that opportunity to compete for the QB2 job in 2024. But Shane Buechele is a low ceiling option. And here's the thing. Like I mentioned, the primary job is to run the scout team offense, which is exactly what he's done for the last 2 years in Kansas City. And Kansas City's had a lot of success, obviously, right? They've won a Super Bowl in the last 2 years. They've been to 2 AFC championships. So evidently he's got some ability to run a scout team offense. He's got a couple of years of experience doing that. And so just be mindful of what he's being asked to do in Buffalo and kind of what the trajectory is here. Now, one of the herd mentality questions that I wanted to get into that I think feeds right into this conversation that we just had about Shane Buechele and Bill's quarterback depth. It comes from Mark, also had a very similar question turned in by Peter. This is what Mark wrote. He said, with the success this preseason of guys like DTR, Tanner McKee, and Tyson Bagent, do you think next year is the draft for the Bills to take a mid to late round quarterback with some upside to see if we can find our long-term QB2? We have a lot of draft capital in the mid to late rounds, and it seems like a smart way to potentially have a cost-controlled backup quarterback. Mark, this is something I've been thinking a lot about. And not only for the appeal of having kind of a long-term backup that is under contract on a rookie deal for 4 seasons, right? That's attractive to me. But also you just like you mentioned, there's been a lot of success here with teams investing these mid to late round picks in quarterbacks. They're finding backups. The 49ers appear to have found their guy in Brock Purdy. You're seeing Sam Howell, a 5th round pick, starting for the Washington Commanders 2 years after they drafted him. This is not a bad idea to invest in a quarterback, to have that stability potentially with a young player. Now, the challenge is roster ability. And I think that's the Bills' challenge with all of their late round picks, right? I mean, the Bills' 6th and 7th round picks on an annual basis aren't making the team, and they're getting signed off of the waiver wire and they're going to other teams, right? And that's just a testament to the deep and talented rosters that Brandon Beane has assembled. But roster ability is the challenge. And so you have to do one of 2 things here. You either have to be comfortable rostering this player along with Josh Allen as your QB2 and being 1 snap away from this guy running your football team, or you have to like them enough, but not enough to keep them on your active roster, expose them to waivers, and hope to get them back on your practice squad. And that's a little bit of a roll of the dice as well. And so I guess the other thing is you can roster 3 quarterbacks. And so those are the dilemmas, I guess, if the Bills were to invest in a practice or a developmental QB3. But the bottom line is I think the Bills do have a lot of draft capital next year. I mean, they only rostering 4 rookies this year. That's it. 4 rookies. That's all that you'll find on the Bills roster right now. Justin Shorter, Dorian Williams, Osiris Torrance, and Dalton Kincaid. That's it. And so I know that Beane's going to use that draft capital next year probably to trade up just based on his tendencies. But I think that this is a smart idea for the Bills to give themselves something to work with that quarterback behind Josh Allen, to develop as a backup, have some stability there. And it's just never a bad idea in the NFL to invest in quarterbacks. It's the most important position in the NFL. It's the most important position in professional sports. It's never bad to invest in the quarterback position. And so, yes, I would advocate for this, but also being mindful of some of the challenges that come with the roster ability of a young mid to late round quarterback. All right, we got a bunch more herd mentality to get to here in just a moment. But first, need to tell you about FanDuel. They got some great deals going on at FanDuel right now. So get ready for the NFL season with an incredible offer from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, check this out. All customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Folks, now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is super easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. Bet $5, you get $200 in bonus bets, and you get $100 off Sunday ticket, courtesy of YouTube and YouTube TV. Check it out. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, let's keep moving here. The next one today comes from Jason. Jason says, I know the Bills love Gabe Davis, and he seemed to have had a very good camp in preseason. But he's in a contract year, and I can't help but feel like Trent Sherfield, with his blocking ability and the way he approaches the game, could be Davis insurance for next year. Sherfield seems like a guy that has outperformed every opportunity he's gotten in the NFL, and wide receiver 2 in the Bills' offense with Allen and Diggs should be a spot where you can get production without an elite talent. If the Bills can't come to terms with Davis, do you think Sherfield would be up to the wide receiver 2 role next year, especially if Kincaid turns out to be the weapon we hope and further draws defense's attention away from our number 2 spot? I think this is a good question here. And so there's a lot at play. First of all, Trent Sherfield and his upside as a wide receiver 2. I really like Trent Sherfield. I appreciate his game. He's versatile, can play slot, can play outside, can play on special teams. He blocks. He's got decent speed, decent size, decent route running ability, decent hands. He's got a nice skill set. There's no question about that. And for as much as he continues to outperform expectations based on being a UDFA, never spending a day on a practice squad, keeps making roster after roster, as he's done that, it's a little bit weird to me that he's not really found anywhere to be long term. He's been on some different teams throughout the last few years, and you'd expect with all of this mental makeup, physical makeup, who he is as a person, the work ethic, that somebody at some point would have been like, hey, let's keep this guy around for a few years and lock him up. So I'm certainly mindful of that. And I think Trent Sherfield's a player that, just as a depth receiver, as a 3rd or 4th guy in your wide receiver depth chart, just has a lot more value than he would as the number 2 in more of a feature role. And so I think Trent Sherfield is more of a player that I look at as that wide receiver 3 or 4 than the wide receiver 2. Now, I love having him as insurance on the roster as a depth option, as the first guy in for Diggs or Davis if one of them were to have an injury. But locking him in as that wide receiver 2 is something that I feel like is aggressive, and I'm not sure that he has the resume at this point to really validate doing that. And it to me, it falls into a little bit of a trap that the Bills fell into last year. And we talked about this a lot leading up to the season, where all of a sudden Isaiah McKenzie and Gabe Davis moved up the pecking order. They moved up the depth chart, and they really didn't warrant that type of uptick in volume and production and opportunity. And I think when you take a player that's kind of at that stage of their career and all of a sudden expect them to to have this role that they've never really validated themselves in, I think that's where you get in trouble. And just like the Bills did last year. And so I push back on this idea of Trent Sherfield being a potential succession plan for Gabe Davis. Now, I think the interesting conversation to have now off of that is, all right, well, what is the long-term future with Gabe Davis? And I continue to believe that this team is going to keep Gabe Davis around for a while. I think he's going to get an extension. You listen to how everybody talks about him, whether it's Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, Josh Allen, everybody, Steph Diggs, they rave about Trent Sherfield. Now, guys are typically going to talk positively about teammates, but there's just another level of messaging that exists when these guys talk about Gabe and his work ethic. And, just it's crazy it's another level of hype and praise that these guys have for Gabe Davis. And he's a process guy through and through, work ethic. He's a captain this year. I think they're going to lock him up. And right now, if that were to happen, I'd expect it to be $12, $13 million per season in that range. But if he goes out and has this big season that I think a lot of people are expecting, now it starts to potentially be $15, $16, $17 million a season. And so you have this interesting dynamic between the Bills, who I think would love to keep Gabe Davis around long term, and realize that the best opportunity to get him for the lowest value is right now, to give him that extension right now as quickly as possible, because it only goes up. If he goes out and has 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns, which is fully capable of happening, then that becomes a much more expensive contract. And I think Gabe knows that. And so he's probably, I want to maximize this contract. If I sign right now, it's not what it could be after the season. Let me bet on myself. I think it's a little bit like what's going on in Miami with Christian Wilkins. Right now, Christian Wilkins doesn't have the pass rushing numbers to validate $22, $23 million a season. But in Vic Fangio's defense, where he's going to be more of an attack style player and not, like he was with Josh Boyer, setting a lot of picks and not really getting a chance to unleash an attack, he knows he's going to have the sack production this year. And so the Dolphins want to get the deal done now at a lower rate before this sack production comes for Christian Wilkins. Same thing with Gabe Davis in a lot of ways, in my opinion. So a lot of dynamics at play there. I would be apprehensive about giving a big dollar contract to Gabe, just because, you're paying Steph Diggs, you're paying Josh Allen, but you're paying Dawson Knox. You got a decent deal to Dalton Kincaid as a fixture. How many of these playmakers can you pay handsomely, right? I don't know. I'd be interested in seeing it all come together for Gabe, but I think there's a lot of things that you can point to on both sides of this in terms of doing the extension now versus doing it later that makes it complicated on both sides of the equation. Although at the end of the day, I expect them to extend Gabe Davis just based on the messaging and how I think the team perceives the player. Next one here comes from Alan. Alan says, you mentioned earlier that Spencer Brown is pretty thin for a tackle, and that makes attacking his outside a bit easier for opposing rushers. Is this a flat and permanent disadvantage for him, or does it come with a trade-off of, say, being quicker to get to your spots? Is it a case where Brown's body requires a different method of coaching and Cromer is used to more traditional wider tackles? Or should Brown spend a couple weeks on the couch with a few bags of Cheetos? Basically wondering if his body composition, in spite of his strength, speed, and athleticism, will limit his potential ceiling. Really good question here, Alan. And from a Cromer perspective, I've had this conversation with Coach, and I think I did an interview with him as well that it's on YouTube. If you maybe search Joe Marino, Aaron Cromer, you can see this interview. And we talked about how every body type requires a different coaching method. You can't ask Spencer Brown at 6'8", 311 to block the same way as Deion Dawkins at whatever he is, 6'3", 315 or 320. Like, just different body types. And so it's not a one size fits all for technique, right? There's different ways that different body types are going to be most effective with their technique. So there's no blanket technique with Aaron Cromer. He's always coached guys individually tailored to, their body types and their strengths. But I would like to talk a little bit more about this body composition issue for Spencer Brown that I think is a challenge for him. So Spencer's 6'8" and a quarter, 311 pounds, and has 34 3/4 inch arms. He's very tall and he's got really good length, but he's got a narrow build, right? So he's got this combination of super tall, but also narrow. There's not a lot of density to his frame, right? His frame lacks density. And so because of that, I mean, just think about physics and think about a block, a square block versus a rectangular block, and the ability to knock that over, right? Like I'm thinking about my daughter's toys, right? We have these blocks, they're colorful. A rectangular block, you stand it up on the bottom, you can very easily knock that over. You take the square block, it's more dense, it's kind of got a stubbiness to it. You're not just going to easily top that over, right? There's more sturdiness to that density of that square block. And so I think there's some natural challenges that Spencer has just because he's so tall and he's narrow and his frame lacks density. And that does lead to his edges being vulnerable, just because of the center of gravity and the distribution of his weight throughout his frame. And really where I think it becomes an issue and where it could not be an issue is if he did a better job of using his length. He's got nearly 35-inch arms. If he could do a better job of winning with first contact, being more consistent with his punch and his hand placement, that's going to keep opponents at the edge of his reach and away from his frame. Well, the problem is that he doesn't do a good enough job with that on top of being tall and narrow, and guys are able to get to his edges, and he just doesn't have the density to be able to absorb that contact and stay firm. And so for Spencer, it's always going to be a battle for him to play with leveraged hips and winning with that length to keep people away from his frame, just because he doesn't have the body composition that's going to be consistent for him to be able to absorb, because he's tall and narrow, and it's just hard. Not that you want short, squatty players. You want tall, wide guys, right? You want Germain Ifedi's, and I don't want to get out of control here, but Germain Ifedi is the body type that you're looking for. 6'6", 325, 36-inch arms, tons of width, wide base. It's a sturdy build. I think Spencer's just got some body composition stuff that actually kind of works against him. The next one here comes from Chris. Chris says, I was giving you the question. I'm giving you this question for herd mentality. If you want to use it, go ahead. If not, I understand. The main reason I'm bringing it up is because I don't really feel like it's getting talked about a lot. I think people are far more focused right now on the negatives this preseason. I think it would be nice for you to address that on herd mentality, but I'll leave it up to you, Joe. I appreciate this question from Chris, and I wanted to share it with you how it was presented to me, because I think that's important for just kind of what Chris is trying to communicate through his question, but also how I want to attack answering it, because I think there's a lot of truth to what Chris is saying here. And I just generally feel like Bills fans, not everybody, but there's a lot of Bills fans right now that have anxiousness about this football team. And I think there's this understanding, there's this realization that this team has Josh Allen, an elite talent at the quarterback position that's in his physical prime. And there's other really good talent on the roster. And so because of that, you feel like the Bills have the stuff, right, to win it all. And the Bills have never won it all. It's never happened. And we want it bad. And so because of that, I think there's some anxiousness. Meanwhile, you see Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. You see Joe Burrow and the Bengals. And the Bills have lost every time to those teams in the playoffs. The Dolphins and Jets have hype. Lamar Jackson, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, all in the AFC. The AFC North is loaded. And we want our day in the sun. We want that Super Bowl. And I think the anxiousness that some feel is rooted in fear that the Bills group that exists right now won't get it done. And the best opportunity we've had in like 30 years to win the Super Bowl will be wasted. And so because of that, I think every possible issue with the team that may present an issue with winning it all is heightened to 100, and that's where that anxiety is rooted. And so I feel like that's the temperature of a lot of people right now. It's like, man, this team has this stuff. I want it to happen. What if it doesn't? Oh, man, this could be the problem. Middle linebacker, Spencer Brown, whatever issues people have, they're maximized. They're elevated because, well, that's going to be the reason it can't get done. And so I think I honestly believe there's a lot of anxiety right now from the fan base about not being able to win that Super Bowl that we want so bad. And so I think that's why so much of the conversation, at least amongst the fans, has shifted a lot more focusing on the negatives and, even being kind of dismissive of what the team has accomplished and what their capability is. So I think that's where all of that is rooted. All right, we got to talk middle linebacker, jumbo tight end, Isaiah Simmons. All of that's coming after a very, very quick break. All right, folks, you got to check out the Gametime app. Buying tickets to your favorite events, it shouldn't be stressful, but you know what? Sometimes it is. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting excited for the fun that you're going to have. Folks, the Gametime app is awesome. They have flash deals and last-minute tickets, images of seat views, great prices, and everything on the app is super easy to navigate. I really love those seat images that they give you so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And also, Gametime sends the tickets right to your phone. You don't have to dig through emails to find them. It's awesome. So snag the tickets without the stress over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, folks, the next one here comes from Chris. Chris says, can you talk about the differences for a middle linebacker and an outside linebacker pre- and post-snap in this defense and why middle linebacker is more than just read and react at the snap? Also, what will the middle linebacker communicate with the players? Look for this certain play, or will he actually change the player coverage based on what he sees? And lastly, why do offenses / the quarterback designate who the mic is? Good questions here. All right. So that last one's the easiest one. So why do offenses designate who the mic is? And so you've seen this a million times. Tom Brady gets up to the line and says, 52 is the mic. The reason that they do that is because the entire protection scheme is based off of who the mic linebacker is and where they are aligned. And so it could be a slide protection or whatever the protection scheme is. It's based off of identifying who that is, and then the entire offensive line knows what they're supposed to do, in addition to any of the eligibles that are staying in, be it a tight end or a running back to block. So it's setting the protection. That helps them set the protection based off of who the mic linebacker is. And so the rest of this question is about what is really the difference between the middle linebacker and the outside linebacker. Well, the middle linebacker, and of course, what are they communicating? First of all, they're communicating the play call. They have the green dot. That means they have the speaker in their ear. They're getting the play call from Sean McDermott and communicating the play call to everybody on the field. But from there, once the offense gets up to the line and you kind of see how they align, they got to make sure that the front is correct. And I don't know if you ever watch football. Sure, you've watched football. You ever see the middle linebacker go up there and they'll tap a defensive lineman and they'll move over to the left or right slightly? They have to make sure that these guys are in the right gaps. You'd be surprised how often that just doesn't happen. Maybe they don't see that there's a tight end on one side, and so they need to shift over a half a gap or something like that. So that's critical right off the jump. They have that stand-up view of where everyone is and can set the defensive line based on that, which is absolutely critical. So that's first of all. And then they're also communicating with the back seven guys in terms of the coverage and the spacing and, responsibilities and those types of things. The weak side or the outside linebacker doesn't have to do any of that. That's not on their plate at all. They line up on the weak side of the formation, and it's a lot of see ball, get ball. Where the middle linebacker, I mean, they both have to read keys and react, but I think it's a lot easier for the outside player than the inside player, where there's just more bodies, there's more activity going on, and things are coming right at you a lot of times, where that outside player has a different vantage point on things. They get to work more as a pursuit style player. So see ball, get ball, cover that guy, right? There's just a lot less on their plate. And so, I wanted to kind of bring this back to Dorian Williams, because I know that, a lot of us are thinking, wow, just put this guy at middle linebacker. He's looking really good at outside linebacker. It's just not the same, right? It's not, if you're good at outside linebacker, that doesn't mean you're going to be good at middle linebacker. We've seen a ton of players where that's just not true. And I don't think it's that Dorian Williams can't be a middle linebacker. I think he can. I think it's just a matter of, I think they tried it out in OTAs and it didn't go that well, and they wanted to keep things simplified, allow him to learn the outside position, and that's going to be a benefit to him if and when he ever goes to the middle linebacker spot. So hopefully that sheds some light on just how different those roles are, and especially just what's on their plate. And then there's just different physical gifts that are more helpful at one spot than the other. As an outside linebacker, you can be a little bit more lean. Athleticism, you're going to play in space a lot more, where on the inside, you're dealing with a lot more contact, a lot of things right at you. So your ability to play downhill and take on contact and play into the line of scrimmage, it's stressed in a completely different way. All right, next one here comes from Alex. Alex says, who do you see filling that jumbo tight end role for the Bills this year? It was Doyle, then Hart. Would that be a way for Demark to get on the field and use his athleticism? Also, if you do think it's him, how many big man tight ends or tight touchdowns are we thinking this year? Yeah, I think Ryan Demark is a candidate for that. I also wonder about, just the development that he's been going through to really add weight and learn the right side, right? There's a lot on his plate right now. I don't know if the Bills would add that responsibility, although from an athleticism and size perspective, he'd be a great candidate. I think it's going to be Ryan Bates. I think Ryan Bates, if they use this jumbo tight end this year, I think Ryan Bates is a player that the team really likes, that they trust, that has a lot of athleticism as well, that is not going to be a starter. And I think, just you want to find reasons to put him on the field. And I think that's a way to do it, if he's not having to play center or guard. So I predictively, I'll go with Ryan Bates. I think Ryan Demark's a good candidate, but I think just the trust that they have in Ryan Bates to execute his assignments, and they wouldn't have as much of a issue with adding that to his plate. So that's my prediction. Last one here. Gadil says, we all saw that Isaiah Simmons got traded, but if he landed on the Bills, what price would you pay for him in terms of draft capital for next year? In his contract, how much would you have to give him? I don't think it was much of a salary absorption for the Giants. They give up a 7th round pick to get Isaiah Simmons. Quick thoughts on this, because I've seen a lot of people ask me about Isaiah Simmons. I like Isaiah Simmons, super athletic. Physical specimen. And for a 7th round pick, that's attractive. I'll say this. If the Bills traded for Isaiah Simmons, they wouldn't be any closer to solving their middle linebacker problems. That's not where he plays. He's a hybrid slot safety type player. And so if the Bills added Isaiah Simmons, you're really thinking of him for the Taylor Rapp role, and you already have Taylor Rapp. He's not going to help you at middle linebacker. He's a slot. He's a safety type guy. That's where he wins. That's where he was best at Clemson. That's where he's been best for Arizona. Both teams, Clemson and Arizona, tried him at Mike linebacker, and it just did not go well. All right, so that's what you have to be mindful of. He's a physical freak, and because of all of that and the versatility that he offers as a back 7 player, like, he's attractive, and any team should have been willing to pay more than a 7. But what I don't want to get twisted here is that if the Bills would have given up a 6th round pick, all of a sudden they have their Tremaine Edmonds replacement, right? Just younger or whatever. That's not the case. He's not a middle linebacker. And I think he goes to a good spot for him in the Giants. Wink Martindale, creative scheme, allows athletes to be athletes. I think that's a good spot for him. I don't think that the Bills would have done him well based on his skill set and how the Bills play football. It's just very, very different. So you can make a case that every team should have been willing to outbid a 7th round pick. But the real thing I want to communicate is the Bills wouldn't have found their middle linebacker if they traded for Isaiah Simmons. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. I think our next conversation, assuming there's no crazy breaking news, is going to be the Stat Podcast. I've been talking about this, it feels like forever. I've done it every year where I predict all of the offensive stats for the Bills. And I'm about ready to put pen to paper there and really sort it out and deliver that to you as we get ready for this regular season. I feel like that's one of the big offseason staples that it's left to do. So that's probably going to be our next conversation. And then, some more herd mentality and, of course, getting ready for the Jets. We're going to get into our regular in-season rhythm with some tweaks this year. I'll share some of that next week, but nothing's going away. We're actually just going to add some stuff to our weekly programming for, game week. So I'm very excited about all of that. Make sure that you are subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.